I know you came tonight to hear our very special speaker, and we feel very privileged and honored that Frank Gaffney made the trip out to come to St. Louis today and tell us about a subject that it seems a lot of the presidential candidates are not talking about, and they should be talking about it. Foreign policy and national defense have been the issues all his life. He started out as a graduate of the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and then he picked up another advanced degree at Johns Hopkins, and he's worked in this field all his life. So I think he's one of the best informed guys in Washington about the dangers that our country faces and what we need to do about it. He is now the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, which is recognized as a major resource for informed analysis about foreign and defense policy. And I was very happy that we at Eagle Forum could work with him in trying to keep the Law of the Sea Treaty from being ratified. So far we've been successful, and we're going to keep at it. I hope we can not let Obama ratify any more of his UN treaties. Frank Gaffney is the host of Secure Freedom Radio, a nationally syndicated radio program heard weeknights all over the U.S. And he's the author of a very splendid book on the subject of tonight, Sharia, the Threat to America. I hope when we break you will buy it, and I'm sure you'll be glad to autograph it for you. Frank is a weekly columnist for the Washington Times and Town Hall. His articles have appeared in all the prominent publications. He was a Reagan appointee. He is Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policies, Arms Control, and International Relations. We couldn't have a better informed person to tell us about one of the big threats to our country today, one that you need to be informed about, the threat from Islam. Please welcome Frank Gaffney.
Let me just say at the outset, you can't imagine how much I appreciate being in the company of two of the women I hold in highest esteem in our country today. One, of course, is the lady who graciously introduced me, Phyllis. The other is Donna Hearn, who had the generosity of spirit to actually show me a bit of St. Louis today. So I feel as though I'm properly calibrated to talk to you about a threat to this community as well as to the country more generally. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'm sorry to say that Phyllis and Donna, and I think a few others of you, have already been subjected to this. And I'll ask your indulgence to go through it with you again. But I really would like to talk with you as well as talk at you. So I'm going to try to leave some time for questions by working through a lot of material quickly. If you feel as though I'm not doing justice to it, forgive me, but it's all by way of encouraging you to buy a copy of this, which is available outside, at least in some numbers. It's called Sharia, the Threat to America, which is a book that we published. I spoke too soon about this working. There we go. A book that we published November of last year. It was written by 19 of the folks who I think are among the most eminent national security policy practitioners and other experts that we pulled together to really look at what is Sharia and what does it portend for us if in fact it does come here. So let me talk a little bit about what the phenomenon of Sharia is. You often hear it described as Sharia law. If you've heard of it at all, that's probably the context you've heard it in. In fact, it actually is only partly about law. Just as it's only partly about religious practice, it's really a political and military and legal doctrine. It is in fact intended to define and order all aspects of life, from how an individual practices their faith, their prayers, and so on, all the way up to how the world is governed. It is the law in some of the most horrific places in the world, including Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, and so on. It's what the Muslim Brotherhood, about whom we'll be speaking a lot, is seeking to bring to a number of other places. In fact, as you probably know, several of these have already come under the sway of the Muslim Brotherhood or worse. And literally, on the occasion of announcing the liberation of Libya from Muammar Gaddafi, the new chairman of the Transitional National Council, as they call it, announced that it's now under Sharia. Probably came as a big surprise to some of those people who thought they were going to get their freedoms. Freedom is not what this is about, needless to say. Anybody who has even a passing familiarity with what Somalia or Sudan or Saudi Arabia is like, or Iran, knows that it isn't the constitutional republic of the United States. When you hear somebody say, actually, Sharia is compatible with the Constitution, they either don't know what they're talking about, or they're engaged in something that Sharia calls taqiyya, which is lying for the faith. What most matters to us, I would argue, is that Sharia requires jihad. What is jihad? Jihad is holy war. Yes, there are a couple of passages in the Quran in which it sounds as though it's talking about personal struggle. But in point of fact, the overwhelming references, and certainly the traditions, the practice, the institutionalized Sharia makes it clear it is about conquest. The triumph of this supremacist totalitarian program over the unbelievers, which I think would be most of you, and over all Muslims too, including the many Muslims who don't want to live under Sharia. If you happen to be people of the book, as they call it, you get three choices. You can convert, you can submit as an enslaved community known as dhimmis, or you can die. If you don't happen to be Christian or Jewish, you don't get the middle choice. I don't know about you, none of these are particularly appealing to me. And the point is, because it's not generally appealing, it has to be imposed on you. Through violence, ideally. Again, Muhammad being the perfect Muslim, his experience is one that is to be emulated, which is to say, you use violence where you can to make them feel subdued, as it says in the Quran, to impose Sharia. You are familiar, of course, with this litany of actual or attempted attacks on the United States by jihadists who sought to force us to submit. But basically, the rest of this conversation, my briefing and my discussion with you, is going to be about this, which is the part that we are almost entirely missing as a country, which is basically that where, as Muhammad also taught, violence is not practicable, you still have to engage in jihad. You just have to use the techniques that will enable progress to be made when the use of violence might be counterproductive. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood is all about, as we will be discussing. And despite the fact that this individual, who happens to be, as you may know, the top national intelligence officer of the United States, the director of national intelligence, in fact, characterized the Muslim Brotherhood in testimony before the Congress in February as largely secular, as having eschewed violence and being given to charitable good works. In fact, none of that is true. as you'll see from their creed, which is, well, not particularly secular or nonviolent. It's about jihad being the way, and dying in the way of Allah being what? Our highest hope. Hard to confuse that with a secular organization that has eschewed violence. We know a lot about the Muslim Brotherhood, as it happens thanks to this character, Ismail el-Barasi. This is worth taking aboard because it's a fun fact to know and tell. In 2004, Mr. el-Barasi and his wife were driving across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge out in my neck of the woods. Beautiful span, I don't know if you've been across it. When you get out there, the vistas are just incredible of the Chesapeake Bay. People frequently take pictures. Well, Mrs. el-Barasi was taking pictures all right, except she was taking pictures of the structural support of the bridge. An alert police officer happened, providentially, to see this. Pulled them over, thinking that didn't look right. Ran the IDs and discovered that Mr. el-Barasi was wanted on a material witness arrest warrant out of Chicago in connection with Hamas fundraising. That led to a search warrant, which the FBI executed on their home in Annandale, Virginia, about 20 minutes from the Capitol. And they went top to bottom and discovered, lo and behold, in the bottom, the basement, a secret sub-basement in which were 80 banker boxes full of the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood, in which were found a number of interesting documents, including several that I'm going to show you, including a plan, a strategic plan, called an explanatory memorandum for the strategic goals of the group, dated 1991, of which this was one of the highlights, the mission statement of the Muslim Brotherhood, a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. By their hands, by which they mean ours, and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Again, General Clapper, where's the secular, nonviolent part of this again?